Hey there! So today I am having a go at making pizza dough. Now, about 3 weeks ago or so, I decided to try to make pizza at home. I did it years and years ago, and I'm talking decades, but it's been a really long time. And pizza delivery is expensive, especially when you're like me and you have a teenager who can eat a whole pizza by himself. So yeah, I was in Tesco's and I saw that you can get the dough pre-made now, which is great. I was like, yes, please. Brought it home, followed the instructions, made the pizza with all our little cheese and toppings, and it wasn't great. It was really, really, really bland, like zero flavor, which was surprising. And the texture really wasn't like pizza dough. It was more like a dense bread, quite stiff, quite tough. My son was not impressed. So I decided the next day, I had all these leftover ingredients for base and cheese and things, to try making my own dough, because I had yeast in the house, I had flour. And it came out better. I followed the Joy of Cooking recipe, which I tend to use that cookbook a lot, and it had a bit more flavor. Definitely wasn't quite as tough. Looked more like a pizza when it came out of the oven, but it still didn't taste like delivery pizza. And really, that's what you want when you're eating pizza, is for it to taste like delivery. So I'm having another bash. I've been doing some research online and looking for tips. And I think where I went wrong last time was the temperature of the water. So there was no clues in the Joy of Cooking about what it looks like when the yeast is ready for you to add to the flour. It just says let it sit for 5 minutes and then chuck it in. But I've been reading online that it should kind of froth and bubble. And I think what I did last time was I boiled the water, let it sit for a few minutes to cool down, waited till I could, it didn't feel like it was boiling hot, and chucked it in. And yeah, that totally didn't work. So this time I have tried something different. Let me show you. You can see here that already this is looking better. So this was my first attempt, pouring boiling water out of the kettle, giving it a second, like not straight out of the kettle, which comes out at about 100 degrees Celsius. I think ideal temperature for pizza dough is about 110 degrees Fahrenheit, so quite a difference. And it didn't really froth, it didn't really bubble, it didn't really do anything. Now this is a 1.5 cups of water with 2.25 cup, or 2.25 cup, not cups, that would be a lot of yeast, 2.25 teaspoon of yeast, and a teaspoon of sugar. This is my second attempt, which you can see is a lot better. And what I did here was I poured the boiling water into the measuring jug, and then I left it until it stopped steaming, basically, with a couple of vigorous stirs occasionally to try to let some of the heat out of it. That took probably 15 to 20 minutes, and basically I judged it this time by sticking my index finger all the way down to the bottom of the water, and if it wasn't uncomfortably warm, I gauged that that was probably about right. Human body is what, 98.6 degrees, so a little bit hotter than normal. Should be about right, and it's actually frothed up really nicely, so I'm going to go with this one and we'll see how we get on. The other major change that I'm going to try on the recipe this time, in addition to the yeast, which is looking more positive already, is the flour. So the Joy of Cooking asks for, or calls for, all-purpose flour. That's what I used last time, but the last few times I've been in Tesco's, I have been seeing this baby in the sales section. Nobody was grabbing it, so I did. It's called Tipo, Farina di Grano Tenero Tipo Italian. It's Italian flour, 00 grade, which I believe just means it's a finer flour. It soaks up the moisture and the liquid a bit better. So yeah, I'm gonna give it a go, and from what I can tell online, it's kind of a recommended flour for pizza dough, so I'm hoping that we'll end up with a different result, a more tasty result. And and I'm going to get that in here with some salt and some sugar and some olive oil, add my yeast to it, get it on the mix, and then get it on the kneading hook and give it a couple hours to rise. So here's our little beauty. She has been rising for about 2.5 hours now. I let it go an hour longer than recommended because I've read that part of what gives pizza dough is really nice kind of flavor, that tang, is the yeast processing or duplicating or whatever the sugars. And maybe that's why the Tesco version and the last version I did didn't really come out particularly flavorful. It wasn't the sort of dough or crust that you wanted to kind of nibble on after you were finished with the body of the pizza. So it's definitely risen, and the next step is to roll it into balls and let it sit again. At this point, I'm supposed to separate the dough into halves and roll it into a ball. But as you can see, it doesn't exactly go ball-like. It's elastic, which is good, spring-sprongy. But this idea of rolling it into a ball shape seems a bit fanciful because it just goes into a thing-like splodge. So encouraged by the elasticity, but I don't think there's any way I'm getting this into a ball. No. So I'm just gonna, because I've already punched it down, I'm just gonna let it rest for the 15 minutes it says to in this shape, and then we'll see how it rolls out. All right, it's go time. Definitely springs back. I think the moisture is from changing the flour. It's definitely a wetter dough than the last time I tried this. But you can see, I used to work in a pizza place in Charlotte, North Carolina when I was a teenager called Sparrow's at South Park Mall. And the guy Julio taught me how to stretch pizza dough. And it does feel like that. Like I could get my hands up underneath it if it were just a little bit less sticky, so maybe it's just adding a bit of flour and stuff. So what I'm gonna do is not worry about this being a perfect circle, because that's not super important. It is just home pizza after all. Where are my scissors? She's onto the pan, that's the main thing. Roll the edges for the crust. Half isn't probably quite half, it's a little bit on the small side. Some more spreading. Come on now, I like a thin crust pizza. Plain tomato sauce. You can put garlic in it, onion powder, oh, that's oregano, those sorts of things. But apparently the difference between pasta sauce and pizza base is that pizza base is not cooked. It is just pureed tomatoes. I've put all that sauce too close to the crust. Perfect. Into the oven. Okay, so the recipe calls for 12 minutes, but I feel like my pizza is a wee bit on the small side, so I'm going to check it in 8. My oven does cook true to temperature, which is great. It's this ancient thing from the 1970s, but it works fab. So yeah, I'll check it in 8, and then we'll go from there. Alright. Alright, so there she is. You can see that particularly well. Put that down a wee bit. Not too bad. Look through. Not overly brown. Hot! Hot things are hot. Okay, here we go. So I don't know if you can see that. I think Paul Hollywood might call that a little bit underbaked. You got a wee bubble there. Good. Wee dense line there. Not so good. Hot. Really hot. Well, the pizza part tastes like pizza. I guess I really should be tasting the dough on its own, or the crust on its own. It's okay. I mean, it doesn't taste like raw dough, so that little dense line isn't the worst. I guess it's what makes it. It's definitely crunchy on the outside and chewy on the inside, which is good. Does it taste like delivery dough? Not really. It's a tiny bit on the salty side. So what would I do differently? I think I might add a little bit more flour. The recipe called for a range. It was like 3.5 to 3 3/4 cup. I think I erred on the lower side. So I might go to the upper side, the full amount next time. So the batter isn't quite so gloopy. Stick with the tipo because I like to be authentic. What else? I think the proofing was fine in terms of letting it rise. Maybe I'll try one of those all day ones, but when you do those all day, I've been doing research since in between waiting for stuff to rise and things. Those all day ones are for instant yeast, where you add the yeast dry, not active yeast where it needs water to activate it. So 2 different timelines for 2 different types of yeast. That's what I've learned on this experiment. All about yeast. And give it a few more minutes in the oven. I mean, it's solid on the bottom. You know, it's not flip-floppy. It's got some brown on it. I did not like I loaded it with toppings or anything to weigh it down. Just plain margarita. And I might brush the outer crust with some olive oil just to brown it up a wee bit, because you can see it does look a bit kind of, well, you can't tell here because it's quite yellow, but it Does kind of on the dusty, floury bread side as opposed to that nice golden color. But other than that, I mean, it's totally edible. It's definitely better than the last stuff. Would it win me Star Baker? Probably not, unless nobody else had ever made pizza dough before. Which you never know, could happen. So, yeah. I would call it, if I were marking myself on out of 10, I would say that is an 8 out of 10. Room for improvement. Alright, that's it for pizza dough. See you next time.